The resignation letter was already printed when she handed me the divorce papers. Mine, not hers. She'd printed my resignation from the marriage on cream-colored stationery, the kind she used for thank you notes, and she slid it across the kitchen island the way you'd slide back a meal that came out wrong. "I need you to sign here, here, and initial there," she said. "I've already talked to a lawyer. There's nothing to discuss." My name is Adrian Cole. I was 38 years old, sitting on a bar stool in a kitchen I had paid for, being fired from my own life by the woman I'd spent 11 years loving. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I didn't fight her in that kitchen. I didn't raise my voice. I read the papers slowly, all the way through, because I had learned a long time ago that people who are calm in the moment of their own destruction tend to survive things that destroy other people. Calm is not weakness. Calm is a man counting exits while everyone else is screaming. Her name was Vanessa. Vanessa Cole then, soon to be Vanessa Reyes again, reclaiming the name she'd worn before she decided I was a fixer-upper she could renovate into someone impressive. And the word she used, the word that ended us, the word I would think about for the next 3 years, was ambition. "You lack ambition, Adrian," she said. "You've always lacked ambition. I can't keep waiting for you to become someone." As though the 11 years I'd spent quietly building something she never bothered to ask about were just a long pause before the real version of me showed up. She didn't know. That was the thing she would never forgive herself for later. She didn't know what I'd been building, because she had stopped asking me questions about my life somewhere around year 4, around the time the other husbands started getting promotions and lake houses, and she started measuring me against men whose names I didn't know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where you'll understand why none of what came later was revenge. It was just arithmetic. It was just a bill finally coming due. We met in a coffee shop in the Pearl District in Portland, back when I had nothing but a laptop and a stubborn idea. I was 27. I'd left a stable job at a mid-sized accounting firm, left it on purpose, against everyone's advice, because I'd seen something. I'd watched dozens of small businesses get strangled by their own books, drowning in compliance work they couldn't afford and couldn't understand. And I thought, somebody should build a firm that does this differently. Not just bookkeeping, strategy. A firm that treats a 12-person bakery with the same intelligence a Fortune 500 gets from McKinsey. It was a big idea, hiding inside a man with a cheap laptop and a coffee he was nursing for 2 hours because he couldn't justify a second one. Vanessa was the most beautiful woman in the room. She still is, I'll give her that. Beauty was never her problem. She was sharp, funny, ambitious in the way that felt electric before it felt like a verdict. She asked me what I did, and I told her the truth. I'm building something. I didn't say what. I've never been good at selling the dream before it's real. I'd rather show you the building than the blueprint. Building what? She asked, smiling. A firm, I said. Eventually. Right now, it's mostly me and a spreadsheet and a lot of phone calls. I watched something flicker behind her eyes when I said it. I didn't understand the flicker then. I understand it now. It was the flicker of someone doing math, measuring the gap between building something and has something, deciding whether the gap was worth waiting out. She decided yes, for a while. We married 18 months later in a small ceremony by the coast, because that's all I could afford. And she cried real tears that day. And I want to be fair to her. I think she loved me then. I think the rot came later. Love rarely arrives rotten. It rots in the dark, slowly, while you're busy being grateful it exists. There was one person who saw it before I did. My grandmother, my grandfather's widow by then, came to the wedding, 81 years old and sharper than anyone in the room. After the ceremony, she took my hands in hers and looked at Vanessa across the lawn for a long moment, the way a woman who has buried a husband and outlived 2 recessions looks at things. Then she leaned in close. "She married the man she thinks you're going to be," my grandmother said quietly. "Make sure she's still here when you turn out to be the man you actually are. They're not always the same, baby. And a woman who loves the future version of you doesn't always recognize the man standing in front of her." I laughed it off. I was 28 and in love, and I thought she was just being a careful old woman. I'd remember those words 11 years later, sitting at a kitchen island with cream-colored stationery sliding toward me. She'd seen the whole thing in a single glance across a lawn. The old ones usually do. They've watched the river long enough to know which water runs deep and which just runs loud. For the first few years, we were happy in the way broke young couples are happy, defiantly, against the evidence. I built my firm one client at a time. Cole and Associates, I called it, which was generous, because for the first 2 years, the associates were a part-time bookkeeper named Reggie and a fern I kept forgetting to water. I worked 80-hour weeks. I'd come home at midnight, and Vanessa would be asleep, and I'd eat cold dinner standing over the sink and feel like the richest man alive, because I was building something with my own hands. The clients came, slowly, then steadily, a landscaping company, a chain of 3 dental offices, a regional logistics firm that doubled in size after we restructured their finances. But here's what matters. I never bragged. I never came home and announced a win. It wasn't humility, exactly. It was something my grandfather told me once, sitting on his porch in Mississippi when I was maybe 9 years old. He'd built a small construction business from nothing, and he told me, "Adrian, a man who has to tell you he's winning isn't sure he is. The river doesn't announce that it's deep. It just drowns the people who thought it was shallow. I didn't understand it then. I built my whole life on it later. So I stayed quiet about the firm. And Vanessa stopped asking. That's the part I take some responsibility for. I let her believe the version of me that was convenient for both of us, the steady, unremarkable husband who went to an office and came home tired and never quite arrived anywhere impressive. I let the silence calcify into a story she told herself. And the story she told herself was that she had married a man without ambition. Quiet is not the same as empty, but you can't blame someone for believing a room is empty if you keep the lights off every time they walk by. The slow rot has a soundtrack, and the soundtrack is comparison. It started with her friend Dahlia. Dahlia's husband, Brandon, sold commercial real estate, and Brandon was the kind of man who narrated his own success at dinner parties. The new Range Rover, the place in Scottsdale, the watch he'd point at while pretending to check the time. Vanessa would come home from those dinners quiet, then sharp, then cruel in small increments. Brandon just closed a $40 million deal, she'd say, scrolling her phone in bed, not looking at me. He took Dahlia to Italy for her birthday, first class. That's nice, I'd say. Is it? She'd answer. Is it nice, Adrian? Or is it just something other people get to have? I'd absorb it. I was good at absorbing. 11 years of marriage teaches you how to receive a blow without flinching, the way a boxer learns to roll with a punch so it lands soft. But every blow leaves a mark, even the ones you roll with. I just stopped showing her where the marks were. Then came social media, which is just comparison with better lighting. Vanessa curated a life online that was 3% true and 97% aspiration. Photos in restaurants we couldn't comfortably afford, captioned like we owned them. And underneath every post, the same hunger. Why don't I have what they have? Why is my husband not the kind of man who provides what they provide? There was a night that year I think about more than the rest. We were getting ready for one of Dahlia's parties, and Vanessa stood in front of the closet for 40 minutes, pulling dresses off hangers and dropping them on the floor. And finally she turned to me with tears standing in her eyes and said, "I have nothing to wear that won't make me look like the poor friend." I told her she was the most beautiful woman in any room she walked into. She looked at me like I'd said something cruel. "Beautiful doesn't pay for anything, Adrian," she said. Beautiful is what they say about you when there's nothing else to say. I had $11,000 in a personal account that night that I could have handed her without blinking. I had a firm worth more than every house on Dahlia's street combined. And I said nothing. I let her cry over a closet full of clothes while a man with the means to dress her in anything she wanted stood 3 feet away, running his quiet, terrible experiment. I'm not proud of that night. I tell you about it because I want you to see that the wall I built had 2 sides, and I was trapped behind it just as surely as she was. She didn't know we could afford all of it, and more. She didn't know that by year 9, Cole & Associates had grown to 40 employees, 3 offices, and a client roster that included 2 companies whose names you'd recognize. She didn't know because I'd built a wall between my work and my home, so high that not even my wife could see over it. Why? I've asked myself that 1,000 times. The honest answer is ugly. Part of me was testing her. Part of me wanted to know if she'd love the man in the dark or only the man in the spotlight. I ran an experiment on my own marriage, and I want to be clear, that was a cruelty of mine, a quiet one, and I've made my peace with owning it. But the experiment ran, and the experiment returned its result, and the result was the cream-colored stationery on the kitchen island. The cold blow came on a Tuesday in October. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd just signed the biggest contract in my firm's history that morning, a national restaurant group, a contract that alone would generate more revenue than my first 6 years combined. I came home that night quietly thrilled, thinking, maybe tonight is the night I finally show her. Maybe tonight I take down the wall. Maybe I say, "Vanessa, sit down. There's something I've never told you about who I am." I never got the chance. She was at the kitchen island when I walked in. The papers were already there. She was wearing the navy dress she wore to important meetings, and her makeup was perfect, and I understood immediately that this was a performance she'd rehearsed. "Adrian," she said, "I need you to sign these." I set down my keys. I read the top sheet. Petition for dissolution of marriage. "You're leaving me," I said. Not a question. "I'm leaving the situation," she said. And that word, situation, told me everything. I had become a situation, a logistics problem, a thing to be resolved. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep waiting for you to become someone. You lack ambition, Adrian. You've always lacked it. I'm 36. I don't have time to wait for a man who's content with fine. Content. She thought I was content. She thought the quiet was contentment. She'd lived 11 years beside a volcano and called it a hill because it never erupted on her schedule. "Is there someone else?" I asked. Calm. Always calm. She didn't answer fast enough, and the pause told me what the words wouldn't. There was someone else. There's almost always someone else. Betrayal rarely happens in a vacuum. It happens because a door was already open somewhere else and a person decided to walk through it before closing the one behind them. "His name doesn't matter," she finally said. "It does to me," I said. "But you're right. It doesn't matter to this." I picked up the pen. I read every page. All of it. The division of assets. She'd listed our accounts, the house, the cars. She had no idea what I actually owned. The firm wasn't on the list. She didn't know to put it there. She thought Cole and Associates was a small office where her unambitious husband pushed papers for a modest salary. She'd handed me divorce papers and forgotten to ask for the one thing that mattered because she never knew it existed. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt grief. Real grief. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone. Because somewhere under all the math, I had loved this woman, and the part of me that loved her was watching the part of me that survived things calmly fold up the marriage and put it in a drawer. I signed. I gave her the house. I gave her both cars. I gave her the joint accounts, every dollar she could see. I gave her everything that was visible, because the visible things had never been the point. That was easier than I expected, she said, almost disappointed. People who plan for a war are always a little hollow when you hand them the white flag before the first shot. You wanted ambition, I said, standing, picking up my keys. I hope you find it. No tears, no trembling hands, no last look. I walked out of the house I'd paid for and drove to a hotel and slept better than I had in 2 years. The fall, in my case, was a choice. I could have stayed in our city. I could have stayed in the beautiful house, kept the cars, made her fight me for the firm she didn't know about. Instead, I gave her the visible life and quietly took the invisible one. The company, the future, the version of myself I'd been building in the dark, and I left. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment near my downtown office, 800 square feet. A mattress on the floor for the first month because I genuinely could not be bothered to buy a bed frame. From the outside, anyone watching would have seen a man whose wife left him and who promptly downsized into bachelor sadness. That's exactly what Vanessa saw when she heard about it through mutual friends. I know because Dahlia, of all people, called me. Adrian, Dahlia said, her voice oozing with that particular pity reserved for the recently discarded. I just want you to know I think Vanessa handled this terribly. But maybe this is a wake-up call? Maybe now you'll finally light a fire and do something with your life? I almost laughed. Instead, I thanked her for her concern. Because here's a small, mean truth I'll admit to. There is a specific pleasure in letting people underestimate you. It's like holding a winning hand at a table where everyone thinks you're bluffing. You don't show the cards. You just keep playing. The cards don't get less powerful because nobody believes in them. Documentation protects peace. So does silence. I let them all believe I'd fallen. Vanessa told the story at every dinner party, the cautionary tale of the man who lacked ambition, the man she'd had to leave to save herself. I became a character in her redemption arc, and I let her, because a man who is actually building something doesn't have time to correct the narratives of people who stopped paying attention to him years ago. The river doesn't announce that it's deep. Here's what was happening in the dark while everyone pitied me. Cole and Associates was exploding. That national restaurant contract was the first domino. Within 18 months of my divorce, we'd grown from 40 employees to 110. We opened offices in 3 new cities. A private equity group approached me about acquisition, and I turned them down because I didn't build this thing to sell it. I built it to outlast every person who ever called me unambitious. We rebranded. Cole and Associates became Meridian Strategic, a boutique financial and operations advisory firm that, by the time this story reaches its climax, would be one of the most respected mid-market consulting firms on the West Coast. My name wasn't on the door anymore. That was deliberate. I'd learned the value of being the man behind the building, rather than the name on it. I bought a place on the water, quietly, through an LLC. I traveled. I dated, eventually, carefully, women who had no idea what I did for a living until the 3rd or 4th date, Because the experiment with Vanessa had taught me to value the people who liked the man before they knew the bank account. There was a moment, about a year into the rebuild, that I want to tell you about, because it's the moment the grief finally broke. I was in a hotel bar in Denver after closing a deal, alone, having a single glass of something good. A man 2 seats down struck up a conversation. Older, silver-haired, the easy confidence of someone who'd already won whatever game he was playing. He asked what I did, and I told him I ran a consulting firm. He asked if I was married. I said I used to be. He nodded the way men nod when they've been there. "Let me guess," he said. "She left because you weren't enough yet." I looked at him. Something like that. He swirled his drink. My first wife did the same. Walked out the year before everything hit. You know what I figured out eventually? He didn't wait for me to answer. The people who leave you for not being enough are telling you something true about themselves and something false about you. The true thing is that they needed you to already be finished. The false thing is that you were ever the problem. He set down his glass. Don't spend your good years proving them wrong, son. Living well isn't revenge. Revenge means you're still keeping the seat warm for them. Just live. The proving takes care of itself. I never saw him again. I don't know his name, but he handed me something that night I'd been unable to give myself for a year. Permission to stop performing my recovery for an audience that wasn't even watching. I drove back to my 800 square foot apartment a different man. I bought a bed frame that week. Small thing, but it was the first thing I'd bought since the divorce that wasn't an apology to myself. And I healed. Slowly. The grief stone in my chest got smaller. Some mornings I'd wake up and realize I hadn't thought about her in a week, and that felt like a small resurrection. I thought the story was over. I thought she was just a chapter I'd survived. People will tell you that living well is the best revenge, and they're half right. Living well isn't revenge at all. It's just living. Revenge requires that you keep looking back at the person you're trying to defeat. I'd stopped looking back. I'd genuinely, completely moved on. Which is exactly why the universe decided to bring her back. It was a Thursday, 3 years, almost to the month after the divorce. Meridian Strategic had grown enough that we'd opened a flagship office in a glass tower downtown, and we were hiring aggressively through a new division, corporate communications and client strategy. The kind of role that wanted polish, presentation, the ability to walk into a boardroom and command it. My head of HR, a sharp woman named Priya, ran the hiring, and I stayed mostly out of it. I'm the founder and CEO, but I learned long ago to let good people do their jobs. That Thursday afternoon, Priya knocked on my office door with a strange look on her face. "Adrian," she said, "do you know of Vanessa Reyes?" The name landed in my stomach like a dropped glass. Reyes. She'd taken her name back, just like she'd planned. "Why?" I asked, calm. I have spent my whole life building the muscle of calm, and I needed every fiber of it in that moment. "She's a finalist for the senior communications role," Priya said. Strong candidate, honestly. Great presentation, good experience. She's in the building right now, actually. Second round interviews. The panel loves her. Priya paused. The name just rang a bell. Reyes. I wasn't sure if there was some history. Your assistant mentioned once that your ex-wife... Vanessa, I said. Yes, we were married. Priya's eyes went wide. Oh, Adrian, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd applied here. Does she know this is your company? And that was the question, wasn't it? Does she know? She didn't. Of course she didn't. To Vanessa, I was Adrian Cole, the unambitious ex-husband pushing papers somewhere modest. She had no idea I'd founded Meridian Strategic. She didn't know my name had ever been on the door, because by the time the firm got famous, my name wasn't on the door anymore. She'd applied to work at the company I'd built from a cheap laptop and a coffee I nursed for 2 hours. Applied for a job to receive a paycheck signed by me. And she had no idea. The room I was sitting in went very quiet. Not the actual room, the room in my head. The room where I keep the version of myself that decides things. It went silent, the way a room goes silent before a storm or a verdict. "Priya," I said slowly, "tell me about her interview." I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because the easy version of this story is that I felt vindicated, triumphant, that I rubbed my hands together like a man in a movie. That's not what happened. What I felt first was something closer to vertigo. The sheer, dizzying improbability of it, that the woman who left me for lacking ambition had, 3 years later, without knowing it, walked into the lobby of the most ambitious thing I'd ever built and asked us to please consider her for employment. The cosmic joke of it was so large, I almost couldn't see the edges. And underneath the vertigo, something older. A small 9-year-old boy on a porch in Mississippi, listening to his grandfather. The river doesn't announce that it's deep. It just drowns the people who thought it was shallow. I had become the river, and Vanessa had just stepped in, thinking it came up to her ankles. "Priya," I said, "I need to think about how to handle this. Where is she right now?" "Conference room B, with the panel. They're wrapping up. There's usually a final, informal step where the candidate meets a senior leader, kind of a culture fit conversation." Priya hesitated. "Normally, for a role this senior, that would be you." Of course it would. Here is where the easy story would have me do something cruel. March into conference room B. Reveal myself in a blaze of glory. Humiliate her in front of the panel. Live out the fantasy that every wronged person nurses in the dark. I didn't do that. I want you to understand why, because the why is the whole point of this story. I didn't do it because cruelty would have made it about me. Cruelty would have turned a moment of perfect, earned justice into just another act of pettiness. And because, and this is the part that took me 3 years to understand, the universe had already done the work. I didn't need to humiliate Vanessa. Reality was about to do it for me, in a way no scripted revenge ever could. All I had to do was let it. So I told Priya the truth. Run the process exactly as you would for anyone. Don't tell her anything about me. When it's time for the final culture fit conversation, send her to my office. I'll handle it from there. And Priya, I'm not going to do anything cruel. I just need to close a door that's been open for 3 years. Priya nodded slowly, the way people nod when they realize they're standing at the edge of something they'll be telling stories about for years. I had 40 minutes before Vanessa would walk into my office. I used them to think about the man I wanted to be in that room. Not the man who'd been discarded on a Tuesday in October. Not the boy on the porch. The man I'd built in the dark. Calm, whole, free of the need to win. I cleared my desk of anything that would give it away too early. I put on the suit jacket I keep on the back of my chair, and I sat, and I waited, and I felt my heart beating in that slow, deliberate rhythm I'd trained it into over 1,000 high-stakes meetings. The rhythm of a man counting exits while everyone else is screaming. At 4 o'clock, there was a knock. I'd like to tell you I was perfectly composed in those 40 minutes. The truth is messier. Twice, I stood up to go tell Priya to cancel the whole thing, to send Vanessa a polite rejection and let her walk out of the building, never knowing I'd been 40 feet away. It would have been the merciful thing, maybe. The easy thing. But I'd spent 3 years with a door standing open inside me, a draft coming through it I'd learned to ignore but never stopped feeling. And I understood that if I let her leave without ever seeing my face, that door would stay open forever. Some things have to be closed in person, not for revenge. So when the knock came, I was still in my chair. "Come in," I said. The door opened, and Vanessa Reyes walked into my office. She looked good. 3 years had been kind to her, or expensive procedures had been. Hard to say which. She was wearing the navy dress, or one just like it, the meeting dress, the performance dress. She had a portfolio under her arm and a smile fixed in place, the professional smile of a finalist who can taste the offer. She was looking down at her phone as she entered, getting one last glance at the notes she'd prepared, so she didn't see my face right away. "Thank you so much for taking the time," she said to her phone. "I've been really impressed by what Meridian has built." She looked up, and she stopped breathing. I have replayed that moment more times than I'll admit. The smile died first, then the color. Her mouth opened slightly, and no sound came out, and the portfolio slipped half an inch under her arm before her fingers caught it. She gripped it like a life raft. Pure confusion, sliding into pure recognition, sliding into something I can only describe as the specific terror of a person whose entire reality has just been rewritten in a single second. "Hello, Vanessa," I said. Silence. Real silence this time. "Adrian?" My name came out of her cracked and small. What is this? You work here?" I let the question sit in the air for a moment, the way you let a sound finish ringing before you speak again. "No," I said gently. "I don't work here, Vanessa." I founded it. I watched the words travel across her face like weather. Founded. I watched her try to fit the word into the version of me she carried in her head, and I watched the word refuse to fit, because there was no slot for it. The man she'd married didn't have ambition. The man she'd left was content with fine. The man she'd built a whole redemption story around was by definition a man who didn't found things. The word founded wasn't just information. It was a demolition. It walked through her entire understanding of the last 14 years and pulled out the foundation stone. That's not possible," she said. "Cole and Associates it was a little office where an unambitious man pushed papers," I finished for her. "Not cruel, just clear. Yes, that's what you believed. Cole and Associates became Meridian Strategic 4 years ago. I took my name off the door. We have offices in 7 cities now, about 300 employees." I paused. "You interviewed with 4 of them today." "They tell me you did well." She sat down. She didn't ask permission. Her legs simply made the decision for her. She lowered herself into the chair across from my desk and stared at me like I was a stranger wearing her ex-husband's face. Which, in a way, I suppose I was. The man she knew and this man were not the same man. She'd just never met the second one because she'd stopped asking questions in year 4. "I didn't know," she said, barely a whisper. "Adrian, I swear to God, I had no idea." I never would have. If I'd known. And there it was. If I'd known. "If you'd known," I said quietly, "you wouldn't have applied. I understand. Or maybe, if you'd known 3 years ago, you wouldn't have left." She flinched. I hadn't said it to wound her. I'd said it because it was the truest sentence in the room, and we both knew it. Known. Interesting word. Human beings use "if I'd known" when they want absolution for a decision they made with the information they chose to gather. She didn't lack information about me. She lacked interest in me. There's a difference, and the difference is the entire reason we were sitting in that office. You can't know what you've decided to stop asking about. She started to cry. And I want to be careful here because I'd spent 3 years learning to tell the difference between Vanessa's real tears and her performance tears. And these were real. The performance tears came with a glance to check the audience. These came with no glance at all. She'd forgotten there was an audience. She was crying at the sheer scale of what she'd thrown away, and the math was happening behind her eyes in real time, and the math was merciless. "I was so stupid," she said. "I told everyone you lacked ambition. I told everyone. Dahlia, my mother, the women at the club. I built my whole... God, I made you the villain, the lazy husband. And you were..." She gestured at the office, the glass tower, the city spread out behind me through floor-to-ceiling windows. "You were this. The whole time." "I was always this," I said. "You just weren't looking." And now there was an edge in it, a flash of the old Vanessa, the one who could find a way to make her betrayal my fault. "If you just told me what you were building, we could have..." I held up a hand. Not aggressively, just enough to stop the sentence before it finished becoming an accusation. "You're right," I said. "I didn't tell you. I kept it from you, and that was wrong. And I've owned that for 3 years. I built a wall between my work and our home, and I let you believe a story that wasn't true. I take full responsibility for that wall. But Vanessa, a wife who loves a man asks him questions. She stays curious about him. For 7 years, you didn't ask me a single real question about my work, because somewhere in year 4, you decided I wasn't worth being curious about. I hid the building, yes, but you stopped looking at the man." "Those aren't the same failure, and only one of them ends a marriage." She had no answer for that. There wasn't one. We sat in the quiet, 2 people looking at the wreckage of something that had been real once and was real no longer. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "With the job, the role." And this is the moment the easy story would have me lean back and savor. Tell her she's fired before she's hired. Watch her crumble. Take the win. I didn't want the win. The win had already happened, 3 years ago and again this afternoon, without any effort from me. What I wanted was to close the door cleanly, like a man who has finally finished a long subtraction and can put down the pencil. "You're a strong candidate," I said. "Priya tells me the panel loved you. That's not nothing. That's real. The skills you have, the presentation, the polish, those got you to the final round on merit, and I want you to hear that clearly, because I think you've spent your whole life believing your value was decorative. But you and I both know you can't work here. Not because I want to punish you, because every day you walked into this building, you'd be standing inside the proof of the worst decision you ever made. That's not a workplace. That's a wound with a desk in it. I wouldn't do that to you, and I wouldn't do it to me." She nodded, slowly. The tears were drying now. Something in her was settling, the awful, clarifying calm that comes after the worst sentence has finally been spoken aloud. "So, that's it," she said. "That's it." I stood. I walked around the desk, and I did something I'd thought about for 3 years and never expected to actually do. I extended my hand, not for a handshake of business, for something closer to a benediction. "I forgive you, Vanessa," I said. And I meant it. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. You left a man who loved you because you couldn't see past your own comparison to anyone else's husband. And you spent 3 years telling people a lie about who I was. That did real damage. But I forgive you, because carrying it has cost me more than carrying it has ever cost you. And I'd like to set it down now. She took my hand. Her grip was weak. The grip of someone who has just understood, completely, the size of what they'll never get back. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, she said, and I was too busy looking at everyone else to notice. I know, I said, not cruelly, just honestly. I hope you look closer next time, at whoever's actually in front of you. She left my office at 4:20. I watched her walk to the elevator from my open door. The navy dress, the portfolio held tight, the careful, devastated posture of a woman walking away from the second biggest mistake of her life, which had turned out to be the same as the first one. The elevator doors closed. She was gone. Priya appeared at my door a few minutes later, eyebrows raised in a silent question. Send her a kind rejection, I said. Generous feedback. The truth, that she interviewed well. And Priya, pay her interview travel expenses, even though we don't usually. Quietly. Priya blinked. After all that, you want to pay her expenses? After all that, I said, I want to be the kind of man I'd have been even if she'd never walked back through that door. The whole point of building yourself in the dark is that you don't change when the lights come on. Priya looked at me for a long moment, and then she smiled, a small, knowing smile, and went to write the kindest rejection letter of her career. I sat alone in my office after that, watching the sun go down over the city I'd quietly conquered, and I waited to feel triumphant. I'd earned it. If anyone had ever earned a victory lap, it was the man whose wife left him for lacking ambition, and who then, 3 years later, watched her apply for a job at the empire he'd built. But the triumph never came. What came instead was something quieter and far more valuable. Peace. The specific, weightless peace of a man who no longer needs anyone's recognition to know what he's worth. That's the thing nobody tells you about being underestimated. While they're busy not seeing you, you get to build in total privacy. No expectations. No audience. No one measuring you against Brandon's Range Rover. The lights are off, and in the dark, you can become anything, because nobody's there to tell you what you can't be. Vanessa thought she was insulting me when she said I lacked ambition. She was actually handing me the greatest gift a builder can receive, the freedom of being completely overlooked. The money was never the point. I need you to understand that, because it would be easy to hear this story as a fantasy about getting rich and winning. It isn't. The firm, the glass tower, the LLC, the place on the water, those were just the visible parts. The thing I actually built in those years in the dark wasn't a company. It was a self. A man who could be discarded on a Tuesday and sleep soundly that same night. A man who could watch the person who broke him beg 3 years later and feel not triumph, but a strange, gentle pity. A man whose worth didn't live in anyone else's eyes. Ambition was never the thing I lacked. What Vanessa called ambition was just noise. The announcing, the Range Rovers, the dinner party narration, the curated proof of a life. Real ambition is quiet. It's a man with a cheap laptop, nursing a single coffee, choosing the long, invisible road because he can see something at the end of it that nobody else believes is there yet. The river doesn't announce that it's deep. I keep my grandfather's line framed now on the wall of that office. Not the whole thing, just 4 words. Build it in silence. Most people who visit assume it's a productivity slogan. It isn't. It's a reminder of the most important lesson of my life. that the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor, and the people who truly love you will stay curious about you long after the world has decided you're finished. Vanessa found her ambition, eventually. I heard, through the same mutual friends who once pitied me, that she remarried. A man with a Range Rover and a place in Scottsdale. A man who narrates his wins at dinner parties. I hope it makes her happy. I really do. I have no anger left to spend on her. Anger is just love that's gone sour, and mine went sweet instead, somewhere in those quiet years by the water. Forgiveness isn't the hard part. Trust is. I forgave Vanessa completely the afternoon she walked out of my office. But I'll never trust the kind of love that has to measure you against another man before it decides you're enough. That kind of love isn't love. It's an audition, and the role is always being recast. I still sit on the patio of the place on the water most evenings, watching the light go flat and gold on the surface. Sometimes I think about the man I was at 27, broke and stubborn, nursing a coffee in the Pearl District, telling a beautiful woman I'm building something, without telling her what. I wish I could tell that young man what I know now. I'd tell him to keep the secret a little longer, to build it in silence. To stop running experiments on the people he loves, but never, ever to dim the light just so someone will love the smaller version of him. I'd tell him, the woman across the table is doing math, and one day, 3 years after she thinks she solved you, she's going to walk into a glass tower and discover she got the equation wrong. And you won't even need to gloat. You'll just need to forgive her, pay her travel expenses, and watch the elevator doors close. The river doesn't announce that it's deep. It just keeps flowing, long after everyone who called it shallow has gone home.